Good evening. Tonight is Tuesday, May 10th, 2011, and we have a Points of Information regular parliamentary debate for the Toronto Debating Society this evening. And the debate topic, the resolution this evening, is be it resolved that the primary motive of the government is to be re-elected. Argue for the motion for 7 minutes. I would like to welcome Gerry to the lectern as the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, members of the opposition, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's resolution, the primary motive of the government is to be re-elected. First, I'm going to define the resolution, and then I'm going to give you my 3 arguments with evidence. The definition, primary motive, means the main aim of their time and activity in office. Government, we mean the elected officials of the United States and Canada. Is to be re-elected, we mean is to appease their constituents so that they can be re-elected. My first argument. Governments or individuals very soon after having won an election often make changes in policy or law in order to solidify their majority position. 2 examples of this occurred after the recent federal election. First, within a week of having won a majority position, the Conservatives announced that they were going to create up to 30 new seats in the electoral process. When they announced that some of these seats would be in Quebec, they won the backing of the NDP. The majority of the seats, however, would be created in strong Conservative ridings. An example of this can be seen in the York Simcoe riding held by Peter Van Loan, a long-time serving and very popular Conservative cabinet member. With his riding split into 2, this would undoubtedly produce an extra Conservative seat in the next election, thus boosting the existing majority situation. This move is calculated to drive an even bigger wedge between the Conservatives and the Liberals. The Conservatives feel that they can control the NDP and that they are not a real threat to their majority. A second example of this occurred a week after the election, when the Conservatives were quoted in the Vancouver Sun on May the 9th that Jack Layton's election promise that all Supreme Court members would have to be bilingual would not be followed upon by the Conservatives, and that the status quo would remain. This promise by Layton undoubtedly helped him in Quebec, and now the move by Harper to reject this change in policy no doubt will keep his Conservative majority happy all across Canada and thus further solidify his position. My second argument. Elected officials, whether federal, provincial, or local, will seldom begin long-term expensive projects, which although they might be beneficial to society, show no short-term benefits which can be reflected in election results. A good example of this is the situation of the Gardiner Expressway. The expressway system built in the 1960s today is antiquated and has been the subject of many debates over the last 20 years. In the early 1990s, many proposals were put forth as to the future of the Gardiner. Tear it down, bury it, improve it. Aside from some relatively inexpensive repair work and adding better guardrails and lighting, very little has been done, except for the area east of the Don River, which they found was cheaper to tear down than to repair. However, the cost of tearing down the downtown portion far exceed the cost of temporary makeshift repair work. Also, the voters do not have to put up with 5 to 10 years of estimated time for the entire project of removal and improving existing transport. A quotation in the Toronto Star, quote, "The lack of municipal funds and political will have repeatedly stalled such plans." In the year 2000, Mayor David Miller's response to the Waterfront Task Force, which outlined several diverse methods of removing the Gardiner, was that the, quote, "project was not a high enough priority at the time." This was after several of his council members said that their constituents were against the removal and certainly against the high cost of the project. So once again, we see that a long-term project, which almost everyone has agreed upon, needs to happen, gets rejected because of the short-term goals of elected officials and their need to keep their voters happy so that they can stay in office. A third example of this is the traffic situation in downtown Toronto. Planners have been suggesting for almost 50 years that vehicular traffic should be restricted in the downtown core. And some even suggest that a no-vehicle section akin to Ottawa would be beneficial to Toronto. This naturally has never been acted upon for one main reason. This would be political suicide for whoever enacted that change, and thus it has never occurred. A final example of this need to please the voters in the short run to preserve the jobs of elected officials occurs over the issue of smoking. In an earlier debate at this club, it was revealed that the cost of medical treatment and of maintaining care facilities for victims of tobacco far outweighs the taxes generated by the sale of cigarettes. Although tens of thousands of people die every year, an outright ban on the sale and use of cigarettes would save the government hundreds of millions of dollars a year, but it would be the last political move that an official would ever make. Argument number 3. My final argument will be very brief. It is entitled Broken Promises. Like Jack Layton's promise to Quebecers to install bilingual Supreme Court judges, there are countless promises made in the heat of an election which never see the light of day. I'm not going to give examples of these as they are known and accepted by all of us. They happen so that the person can gain votes and are rarely acted upon. Ladies and gentlemen, the aim of the game is looking after number 1. It is to be re-elected and to stay in office. Please vote for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerry. We now have the case put forward by the Prime Minister, arguments and evidence, and I would invite the Leader of the Opposition to come up to the lectern to argue against the motion. Senator Victor for 7 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the government, we have heard 3 examples of mostly municipal politics, why the politicians do not undertake long-term projects because they want to be re-elected. It seems to me that this is rather superficial coverage of the motivation for the primary motivation for the politicians. Certainly when we look at any of our federal prime ministers, whether we start in the relatively recent history with Trudeau, Mulroney, Clark, Chrétien, and ending with Harper, all of these leaders, they have long-term objectives. They do not come to the office with the idea, okay, I'm going to live in Sussex Drive as long as I can. Certainly they come to the office with a vision. They come to the office with the idea that they are going to accomplish something for the nation, that they are going to serve the population, that they are going to leave a legacy for the country. They leave country in a better shape than when they entered. As far as the length of these projects, look at the healthcare which had to be implemented on the federal level. Look at the bilingualism which had to be implemented. All these are much longer term projects than would be Gardiner Expressway.
What evidence do you have, sir, that they come to the office with that long-term vision in mind?
The evidence is clearly in the results. These leaders do not worry about the next elections. Yes, occasionally they do, and as a matter of fact, that's a proof that they are not caring so much about being re-elected. Yes, it might be means to an end, but it is not the end in itself. Look at Brian Mulroney. Brian Mulroney came with a free trade agreement. Free trade agreement was a very controversial topic, yet he was re-elected. Then he decided to drag Canada into 21st century, as was said about him. When he introduced GST, he was clobbered. He lost, his popularity went down to 10%. Not because he wanted to be re-elected. He could have done it if that would have been his goal. He wanted to accomplish something for Canada, make an economic reform, and GST was one of those things which was very, very important for him. He accomplished it, and surprise, surprise, Chrétien, who followed in the steps of Mulroney, he retained GST. He retained not only GST, but he also retained free trade agreement and expanded it to NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, which included Mexico as well. So politicians, depending on the situation where they are, they handle what they can. In terms of Toronto, I'm very familiar with the situation in Toronto. I happen to work for the city. They are usually restricted not by time so much, they are not so much worried about being re-elected, but they don't have funds. People at the city, they do not have funds. They are restricted. They depend on funding from the provincial government. They depend on funding from the federal government. And this would have killed their budget if they decided to build Gardiner Expressway. And even on that level, look at Mayor Miller. He decided to introduce additional taxes. He knew these taxes were not popular, whether it was car registration tax or home transfer tax. These taxes were not popular, and at the same time, during the strike, he went with his heart. He backed eventually Labor. He came from Labor. He was an NDP supporter. He did not worry about the following year, whether he's going to be re-elected. He followed his heart, he followed his vision, he followed his conviction, and he sided with Labor. So he has done many things simply to accomplish what he thought he could do the best for the city and for people he believed in. And he certainly did not worry about being re-elected. There are many examples of politicians who do not worry about being re-elected. Obama is the one. Look at 4 elections in the United States. Everybody told him, do not go ahead with the healthcare reform. Of course he did, because he believed in it. He believed in justice, and he believed he can build some kind of a just society with addition of healthcare for people who could not afford it. Yes, he knew he was going to pay the price, and he did pay the price. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is really difficult to argue that politicians, especially the leaders, I don't say that there are not many politicians who take it as an office. Here they go to the office, they want to be re-elected, and it means for their support. But we are looking at leaders who run the government, people who are in the cabinet. And these people, ladies and gentlemen, these people have vision, they have something in mind to accomplish. They have objectives for their term. And of course, they have to look, and it's not a primary reason, it's a secondary reason to be re-elected, because sometimes you need to be re-elected in order to accomplish something which takes a little bit longer than your term. So they do follow the elections, and they do take it very seriously. However, that's not a primary motive. The primary motive is their ideas, their ideology, their objectives. Those are the primary motives. And they want to serve the people. They don't want to sit in the office and simply collect salaries and pensions. Ladies and gentlemen, vote for against the motion, because it is clear that leaders and the governments do not want to be, as a primary motive, re-elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. So we have the opposition's first speaker representing their side and countering arguments raised by the Prime Minister. To support the government side, I will invite Anita to come up as member of government for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The opposition has stated that the purpose of the government is to enact laws and to deliver on the vision that they have. What we would all like to see in our politicians and what we would like to elect are intelligent people who reason out all sides of a debate and come up with a decision on what their stand will be and to fight for that decision. We are not saying that there are not a lot of people who go into politics with great high ideals and very, very high hopes. We know, I mean, we can give many, many examples of people who go in with high hopes and high ideals. What we are saying is that the system does not allow the politicians to act on them because it forces them to have a motive, which is to appease in order to get reelected. So there's many reasons for that. The press is there.
You said appease the population. Is it for the purposes of to accomplish some kind of an end, or is it just a means to an end?
It can be either. Thank you. So what has happened is our politicians are dogged from the time they're put into office until they're either thrown out or, if very lucky, reelected. The press talks to us about everything, their stand on everything. If that's not popular or if that's not in vogue at the time, they're in trouble. If they vote against policy lines on something that they don't believe in or that is unpopular, they are reprimanded, and we all find out about that. So anything that is not popular ends up ultimately putting them at risk for being thrown out. Yes.
So if they voted against party lines, what's the function of a party whip?
That's a good question. We can discuss that at the top tonight.
Can you adjudicate it though?
So the government has put forth 3 arguments tonight that when the government comes in, that they introduce electoral changes to solidify their position, that politicians will not take political risks, and that they make promises, they'll promise anything to be elected. So I want to just sort of talk a little bit about what they will do to get not take political risks. And this sort of is a rebuttal as well on the opposition leader here. He is saying that that these politicians come in and they are successful in getting through the bills that they want to get. I would like to talk about the health care bill in the U.S. Obama is a man who campaigned hard for a cause he truly believed in. When he got there, he was able to get this through. But what we're seeing is all kinds of problems, financial problems in the U.S. that have caused this to be way less than the ideal of what was hoped for, a very watered-down version. Another example, toll roads. So that is a federal one. Toll roads have been touted as a way of getting rid of gridlock in Toronto. There's not a politician that is going to touch this because it is political suicide. So that has never gone anywhere either. The other thing is, we talked about that they will promise anything to be reelected. I would say that they would also do anything to be reelected. If anybody has been watching, the coverage across this country, you've got, in many cases, intelligent men who are much better in a professional setting than they are in a cuddly setting. And what do you have them doing? Picking out babies, kissing babies. This is not a choice they would have. This is pandering to be popular. Flipping pancakes. Flipping pancakes. How many times does Stephen Harper look comfortable flipping pancakes? No. Does Ignatius look comfortable? I'd say not. And then the dancing. The hoot nannies. Don't they just look like they love this? This is, ladies and gentlemen, what you are seeing here is doing what they have to do to get re-elected. So please vote for the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita. I would assume they'd be flip-flopping pancakes myself.
Whoa!
Maybe that's just me.
You're becoming.
Anyway, before this derails, I will invite the final speaker for this segment of the debate to come up to the lectern for 5 minutes. As member of the opposition, Mr. David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side? No, that's not the answer. There must have been something on the other side that enticed the chicken. Perhaps the grass was greener on the other side. And at any rate, the chicken needed to get over there for something. But people need to get in public office for something. The opposition, the government would have you believe that the only motive, not even the primary one, but the only motive is simply to be re-elected. That would imply a desire to have the perks of public office, to have the pork barreling, to take the money in on the side, to have public adulation and acclaim and so forth, with no particular direction in mind. And that has not been the case of elected governments around the world in the time of democracies in the last 150 years or so. Almost all parties these days in the democracies are fashioned along ideological lines, some kind of left-right split. And in office they tend to practice that. Sometimes they don't do it very intelligently. They either undersell or oversell, and eventually earn the chagrin of the electorate or the boredom of the electorate, time for a change, that kind of thing. But one way or another, that's what they're in there for. They want to cast the world, cast the national society in their own image and likeness. They want to play God. And that's been very, very true of the right-wing ideologically obsessed governments of the last 3 decades in the US and in Britain and in Canada. Yes, sir.
Sir, are you aware that we are only talking about the government of the United States and Canada? Please keep your comments to the North American.
Did I mention Britain? Oh, very well. So, if you look at Mulroney's government, for example, free trade with the US, the GST, and so forth, these are very hard right-wing measures, which eventually cost him the country. If you look at Harper, some of the moves that he has made have not played to his constituency base at all. And they have not played to those outside the constituency base. He has gone ahead, full steam ahead, and damn the consequences, devil take the hindmost. He has come out against Medicare. He hasn't passed any bills in that direction yet, but he has certainly mentioned in the past that he wants some kind of a system where people have choice and that the insurer is not necessarily the broker and the payer is not necessarily the financier and so forth. He has run the most covert government in Canadian history, and he certainly hasn't scored any points with his electoral base on that one. In the dinosaurs of BC, they would say it as it is, Stevie. No. He shuts his ministers up, he muzzles them. He has cut back on the transfer payments to the provinces. Won no points there with anybody. He has sold off public buildings at fire sale prices. It's been gravy train for that for years. The G20 pissed off everybody in the country. His record on the environment is dismal. Nowhere is he winning points. His abuse of Parliament, terrible. So how can we say that he has done this to appease the base? These are the qualities for which he is known. And this is the demon that drives him. In some respects, he is ideologically true. I will give him that. But he has an agenda, and he has an agenda for the Canadian society. And he wants to fashion us into that image. And nothing that I have heard over here tonight indicates that there is anything to appease his constituency base, short of these few SOPs that have been mentioned, for example, the stalling of the waterfronts. That's the Portland's authority. It has nothing to do with the powers that be. The war on the car and so forth. And I got a bit confused because Rob Ford was tossed into the mix too. Broken promises, that's fair game. All politicians get into that. And as far as the seats are concerned, if he finds 30 new seats in Quebec in Tory districts, that will hurt him federally too. But again, it's one more indication of the demon that drives this man. He is messianic, and that is his agenda, and that is the agenda of his government. And they are not in there solely to enjoy the adulation of public office. Thank you.
Thank you, David. While you digest that, we will move now to the second segment of the formal debate, which is the summation portion, where we have the opposition and then the government side speaking for 2 minutes each to summarize and not introduce any new points, but summarize the points that they have made already to refresh your memory as you prepare to vote and as the adjudicators prepare to pass judgment, as it were. I would like to invite the Leader of the Opposition for 2 minutes with a bell of 1 for summations.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the government, I would start with where my colleague finished. Demons that drive this man. Yes, there was an example of broken promise of 30 additional seats, but this is not done because he wants to be reelected. He wants to change the country. He wants to change the face of the country. He wants to strengthen West. There are certain objectives maybe we don't know about he wants to accomplish, and this is one of the ways to do it. In my presentation, I think I have successfully refuted some of your examples from the municipal politics, and I talked about when I talked about David Miller. He wasn't a friend of mine. It was the end of my stay there. Anyway, when I talked about him, and I pointed out that it's not the length of time, it's not all the other motives. Even from municipal politicians are motivated by the objectives and by their vision. And finally, I would like to point out to the points raised by the member of the government. She got into micromanagement of running the elections, about pancakes and God knows what. I don't know what this has to do with our topic. Yes, everybody throws pancakes because they want to win elections, but that is not a prime motive. Prime motive is to introduce bilingualism. Prime motive is to introduce universal health care. These are prime motives, not whether I am flipping pancakes or I am dancing somewhere on the floor. So, ladies and gentlemen, vote against the motion.
Thank you, Victor. In the last 2 minutes, as always, goes to the Prime Minister.
Speaker, members of the opposition, ladies and gentlemen, despite what the opposition has stated, it's a matter of fact that governments make policies and laws to make their political situation stronger. This was my argument number 1, and I insist that 30 extra seats introduced by the Conservatives will not make them weaker. It will definitely make them stronger and solidify the majority situation. Also, long-term projects, whether they are local, provincial, or federal, such as the Gardiner Expressway, which was my example, and Toronto's waterfront plan, they are shunned by politicians from one ticket to the next. Mayor Miller's low priority comment about the Gardiner says it all. He did not want to lose favor by dealing with that topic. That was my argument number 2. Broken promises, such as Jack Layton's promise to have bilingual judges and Barack Obama's health care system, were both well meant. However, very few people including probably themselves, believed that they could be totally undertaken. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a matter of fact. Broken promises are something we expect. People do it for one reason. People want to hear things that they want to hear. It doesn't mean they're going to happen. Politicians do it so that they can be reelected. Please vote for the motion. Thank you.
Now that we have had our discussion, I would like to invite the adjudicator for this evening's debate to come to the lectern for 10 minutes to present his findings and perspectives on this evening's debate. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this was a very interesting debate with the Canadian election right on our heels. I thought the timing was very apt. So this was great. So first of all, came out with the definition: primary motive, main aim, government being USA and Canada. I thought that was okay, because we definitely hear a lot about both types of politics here in the North. And then re-elected was defined as appease constituents in order to be re-elected, which contains the word re-elected. So I didn't really like the recursive use of the word re-elected in there, but I also thought, you know what, it doesn't even really need to be defined anyway, because I thought re-elected was pretty obvious. So didn't lose too much for that. I was just like, okay, that's not framed all that nicely. So Gerry came out, and Gerry had some strong arguments, some good arguments that and lots of examples to go with them, which was great. So he had a nice foundation, and then had some good evidence and some good proof used there, and they were nicely numbered. It was easy for me to follow along how many arguments you had and where everything fit together. And you had a quote of the Toronto Star, which helped a lot out of your arguments and your content section. So that was great. And also on the government side, Anita, you also had some good arguments. I thought that the structure could use a little work. I know that you were trying to also fit rebuttals in there, which worked, but it was difficult for me to tell exactly how many arguments you had and exactly how many examples you had, and whether or not you had any proof or evidence to back up which one of the things you were talking about. So it was, but still, I thought your arguments were good and your rebuttals were good, the ones that I could find in there. And the content and examples that you had, again, I could find, were also good. Going over to the opposition side, Victor, you had a fantastic set of arguments that reframed the debate back to the way it was defined, basically, because Gerry came up and talked about, we're going to talk about the Canadian and American governments, and then a lot of his examples weighed heavily on Toronto municipal politics. And then when you came up and you talked about Trudeau, Mulroney, Clark, Harper having long-term objectives, and then going into a lot of big federal politics that are very long-term in nature, like healthcare, bilingualism, free trade, GST. I thought that really did a good job of decimating the government's overall point of view, and it really shifted the pendulum back over to your side, and I thought that was very well done. So from the argument side and for the content side, lots of points for the opposition side there. And also, David, also on the opposition side, I thought it was also a very good presentation. Lots of examples, not too many arguments of your own, but that's okay because you had a lot of clear and concise statements that you used as reports, and you had a nice way of framing the debate as well. So also some good points over there. I'd like to talk about points of information briefly. I thought the points of information were actually generally well handled. They were used sparingly, which was good because there was a lot of content in this debate, and so we wouldn't want to see them interrupted too often. So I thought they were very good. Anita, I know that you're mostly averse to POIs, but I thought that you cleaned up with your handling of the POIs tonight. You got a lot of points for style and for rebuttal and refutation, the way that you handled them and the way that you would dismiss them. I don't know exactly what the quote was, but there was a question from this side about, isn't that what the party whip is for? And you were like, yes, isn't that a good question, but we're not going to answer right now, we'll go to the pub. And you got a laugh. It was funny, it was well handled because you were right. They were kind of trying to pull you off, but you did not get pulled off. In fact, the only person that really got thrown off kilter tonight was Victor, but not due to a POI. For some reason in your summation you didn't remember where you were going. So you can be thrown off with or without a POI. So that was good. So in general, good use of the POIs. the Prime Minister wasn't questioned during his original foundation. It might have been a good idea to get one in there, but that's okay. To talk about the other ideas for a moment, in teamwork, I thought that the government's teamwork was a bit lacking compared to the opposition, mostly because of the division between talking about basically municipal politics, and then Anita, you did respond to the opposition a lot more and talk about more of what the opposition was trying to get you to focus in on. So I thought that was good, but then teamwork, it kind of seemed like you were coming from at different angles, that your side needed to react more to what the opposition was doing, and when you're the government, you want to be the other way around. So on the other hand, the opposition did a very good job coming from the same direction. You had the same base of evidence that you were consulting. Your arguments fit well together. I thought that the teamwork worked very well there. Style, not much for me to say here. There's great examples from rhetoric from all of the players. The things that really resonated were Anita's the vision of the cuddly politicians, like this is not what they want to do. I thought that was a good argument, and it was also good for style because I thought it would resonate with a lot of people. And now, unfortunately, Victor had a really good destruction of that by saying it's basically a necessary evil. We know it's a game. They know it's a game. So it kind of hurt that a bit, but it didn't hurt any of your style points for bringing it up in the first place. And David, for bringing up Stephen Harper and putting his agenda to fashion society into what he has an image for, that was a great example that on the style-wise also really resonates and also addresses the resolution very well and says, no, it's not his primary motivation. This is his primary motivation, which is basically in defiance of constituents and potential electorates everywhere. So I thought that also really resonated. So in terms of the style, it was the members of both sides that really pulled it up, which I thought was very interesting. So when I finally tallied and scored everything up, again, the opposition side had stronger arguments and basically tied for content with the opposition and the government. The opposition did better in rebuttal and refutation, and the opposition did better in teamwork. So when I calculate the figures, the motion is defeated. The opposition has won with 75 points, and the government with 60 points. And the best debater will go to Victor. And again, that is for reframing the debate back towards the definition and getting away from the small, lower level politics. So that's that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And in an odd turn of events, the popular vote, although small, still significant, actually agreed with the adjudicator this evening, and the opposition won 4-3.